Well, I made the point last week that Epiphany was about Christ being known. The little infant in Bethlehem, small and hidden, like a little tea candle in a room, soon shows who he is, and his glory is clearly seen, like a beacon, blinding from a hilltop. We often see how Jesus is known and manifest in the gospel reading for these Sundays in Epiphany. In last week's gospel, Jesus is manifest to the doctors in Jerusalem when he sits in the temple and he talks with them. In today's gospel, Jesus is known and manifest when the Father speaks from heaven at the baptism and announces, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Next week's gospel is the miracle at Cana, where Jesus turns water into wine. And St. John says, "This beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him." So, the gospel propers in Epiphany show us how Christ has been made known and for what he is known. Then the epistles and the Old Testament propers often show how we are to be known. Last week, we saw Jesus as the new Solomon, the king of wisdom. We, the church, are to be filled with wisdom. We're to be known for being wise. Next week, we see Jesus as the new Noah, who brings the new wine of the new covenant. He brings joy to all creation, peace and laughter to the downtrodden, because he is the bridegroom coming for the bride. We, therefore, are to live joyfully, peaceably, returning slights and violence with goodwill and clemency, as often one does when they're having just enjoyed the best wine. This week, we see Jesus at the waters of baptism as the recipient of God's pleasure. He is known for being known and loved by the Father. Known, loved, and cherished. This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased. And just like in the other weeks, the connection for us follows. What is true of Jesus is true of his church. We too are known and loved and cherished by the Father. We are to be known for being known, loved, and cherished by the Father. And just in case you missed it, you, each and every one of you, is known and loved and cherished by the Father, because you belong to Jesus. You are a part of the bride of Christ. Even though we are far from perfect, we belong to Jesus. And so the Father looks down on us at the waters of baptism and each and every moment that follows and says of us, "This is my beloved daughter. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." In every waking moment, this announcement issues forth. If it weren't for the noise of the world, the flesh, and the devil, we would hear it very clearly. I know you. I love you. I cherish you. No doubt, this direct and intimate connection with the Father and the Son that we share is the greatest blessing of the Christian life. If we take hold of it truly, constantly, there's nothing that can shake us. But to go even further in showing his favor towards us, our Old Testament lesson and our epistle point out two other things that manifest God's favor for his people in the world. This homily has a subject. It's how God manifests his favor towards his people. Zechariah 8. "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I was jealous for Zion with great jealousy, and I was jealous for her with a great fury. Thus said the Lord of hosts, I am returned unto Zion, and will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem shall be called a city of truth, and the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, there shall be old men and old women that dwell in the streets of Jerusalem, and every man with his staff for very age. And the streets of the city shall be full of boys and girls playing in the streets thereof. This passage shows God's favor towards his people. It says that he is jealous with them with a great jealousy. So, my boys have started to play sports. And for the first time, I've had the experience of being just a parent in the stands, not a coach on the sidelines. And there's a big difference between these two. When you're the coach, you're constantly aware of any sign of favoritism that you might show to your son. But when you're a parent on the stands, let's just say it's a very different dynamic. The overwhelming feeling of love, but honestly more of a jealousy that comes from love. You want to see them succeed so badly. You feel it when they are passed over or treated unfairly, or if the ref calls a bad call. But this is only an analogous sliver of how God feels about his people. He is jealous for them with a great jealousy. And how does this loving parental jealousy play out in this passage of Zechariah 8? It says he will establish his people, his remnant in Zion. He will gather them together in the holy city. His people will live together in peace. And what do we see? We see people in the streets of Jerusalem, the elderly walking with their canes, the streets filled with children playing. Very practically, God's favor on his people is manifest to the world when his people live intergenerational, local, joyful lives. Intergenerational, local, joyful lives. One of the greatest pleasures of my life thus far was my pilgrimage to Jerusalem a couple years back. I took the trip with my mentor and friend, Father John Bonesier, and I also took along my middle and high school students. For about a third of our trip, we actually stayed in the old city of Jerusalem, which is an unspeakable privilege. During the day, we'd go from this place to that. We'd go and pray at the Holy Sepulchre. We would learn about the Tower of David. And then at night, we'd actually go out on the streets, just wander. And I don't know if you've ever even seen a picture of the old city of Jerusalem, but the whole thing is made of this gorgeous, shimmering limestone. And these old street lamps just shine right off the scene. It looks wet almost. The whole thing just glows. But one of the most amazing moments happened at dusk on Friday. We were out shopping, getting presents for those whom we love. And all of a sudden, the city goes into just a little bit of a lull. And then it explodes with activity. And all these elderly people and middle-aged people and young people fill the streets, and they're all wearing their very best clothes. They're getting ready and going to the Sabbath feast. Everyone was so happy. And it's hard to imagine any moment sweeter, but I think that if I would have had Zechariah 8 in mind, I would have wept with joy. No doubt God has continued to show favor on the Jewish people. But contrary to an opinion which is really popular in the States especially, the Jewish people are not the primary reference of this prophecy. The scriptures and the fathers teach that the church is the fulfillment of these prophecies. God will gather his church from the four corners of the earth. The church will dwell in the streets, the old with the young. And Zion is the city above, the heavenly Jerusalem that we will enter this morning, every time we take the Eucharist. We possess this new Jerusalem in our hearts. And it is also mystically present when we love one another for Christ's sake. At the very least, we should take away that God's favor for his people is manifest to the world when we live joyful lives together. But I will press further. If God's favor towards his people is shown when the elderly and the young are found both in the street, then how are we going to show that to the world? Where does that actually happen? Think about it. Where does it happen? It doesn't happen. Not here. In the past, our culture was predominantly Christian. There was a robust public life and trust. The old and the young conversed together. There was a shared identity around the gospel. This is not so anymore. Christians just don't play in the street anymore, typically. Our elderly are often found alone in nursing homes. There is no longer a shared Christian identity in our neighborhoods. If we are to manifest God's glory in this way, we have to choose it. We must do our part. I've been very encouraged by the numerous conversations that we've had as a mission about moving closer together when possible. Even moving closer to the church, not to hide from the world, but to manifest the love and favor of God towards his people to the world, to create a culture and a community to invite them into. Is this not the blessing that is promised to us in Zechariah 8? Living local, intergenerational lives is both a manifestation of God's favor towards his people and a crucial testimony to a post-Christian society. It says to the world, "These are my beloved children, in whom I am well pleased." Our epistle shows us another way that God's favor towards his people is shown. He gives us gifts. Having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, Paul begins. Now there's a lot of debates about spiritual gifts. I'm not going to get into that today. First, I simply want to make the connection between spiritual gifts and God's favor. Have you ever actually thought of that? Isn't it wonderful that the passage from Romans 12 is paired today with the gospel that shows God's favor towards his Son, so that we can make a connection between God's favor towards his church and the fact that he gives us gifts. Don't gifts show God's favor? But I've never heard them talk that way. As I've said, there's much confusion about spiritual gifts. But it is clear from the passage that everyone in the church has a role of some kind. And that he or she is to be valued in that role, no matter how low or high. And that they are to do that role with joy and diligence and love and humility. Isn't it interesting that both Zechariah 8 and Romans 12, our propers for today, discuss the community life of God's people? When everyone does their role and is valued by others in that role, it's an incredible testimony to the world that God is here. So much of the application in the Bible is lost because we so rarely live together. The church for so long has been a check in at 10 a.m., check out at 11 a.m., see you next week. We've lost the imagination of a city of God, like in Zechariah 8, where we are actually together in life. So in closing, I'd like to simply read the rest of our epistle with a little bit of an amplification. And I want you to hear Paul's instructions to the Roman Christians as they would have heard them. as members of a Christian neighborhood or a community, as people who dwelt together in the streets of the New Jerusalem. So go ahead and open your booklets to page 10. We're just going to walk through the last half of the epistle passage. We're going to start off with a tough word. Let love be without dissimulation. Say that 10 times fast. Dissimulation means without other hidden motives. Love without hope of political or social advance, but merely for the good of the other. So St. Thomas à Kempis, in our book that we're reading as a church, talks a lot about loving for the simple sake of the good of others and not for any selfish gain, simply for the sake of Christ. So you can find some elaboration on this in the book. Abhor that which is evil. Cleave to that which is good. These verbs are written in the plural. They're written to y'all, the community. They imply some shared understanding of what is good and what is evil. This is called a Christian culture. It no longer exists. Let God use you to remake it. Let God use your home to remake it. Your neighborhood, if you form it, to remake it. Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love. Sharing table. Walking across the street to share a cigar or a pipe with your friend. A gift from one family to another for no reason. Sitting with one another in tragedy. Celebrating in times of joy. He continues. In honor, preferring one another. Encouraging one another. Make it a habit to tell someone that you appreciate them and why. Not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. So the streets of the New Zion, wherever they be, should be filled with activity, yet free from anxiety. We should be churning out poetry and music, recipes, crafts, acts of mercy, businesses known for excellence and fairness, schools that are desirable for their relentless pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer. To rejoice and mourn together, to pray together daily. When the church bell tolls in your neighborhood, to drop what you're doing and maybe walk to the sanctuary to pray with your neighbors. Or not, but pray where you are, together. Distributing to the necessity of the saints, given to hospitality, to see needs and to meet them. The wealthy of the church, assisting the poor, giving them a leg up in life. Those with free time, especially those with children, blessing the lonely with our time and our presence. Bless them which persecute you. Bless and curse not. This will be especially important in the next few decades. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. To be present with those around you. To show empathy towards your neighbors, both the lost and the found. Be of the same mind one towards another. To discuss politics and philosophy, theology, ethics, art, sports, whatever. Maybe to disagree on some of these, but to hold in common who God is and who we are to him. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. To be constantly including those who are outside, who don't know the culture of the New Zion yet, but to teach them, who have nothing to offer except themselves as an icon of Christ. So I leave you with a blessing. May God be manifest to the world through you, his baptized and beloved children, citizens of the New Jerusalem, in whom he is well pleased. Amen.